Hello, Kristen.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
Things are going well. I am living for going home for Christmas. I'm like counting the minutes until I can hop on a plane and go to Florida.
What is the traditional Florida Christmas?
It's Christmas but better because it's warm. So it's I wear t-shirt and shorts or just a long sleeve t-shirt maybe.
I mean, is there some kind of ritual? Does everyone get together at the local mall and have tropical cocktails? I mean, what? How is it different than
there
the
may
classic
be
New England
tropical
Christmas?
cocktails involved if the weather is nice enough, which I think it was about 79 last week. So there will be a trip to a theme park the day after Christmas. My fiance has never been to the Harry Potter portion of Universal Studios, so we're gonna be.
But he's been to Universal Studios.
He has, but he has never been the new Harry Potter section. So we're gonna go.
Exciting.
It is.
He's a Potter fan.
I am too. I will admit that there are frequently times when children's pop literature is something that's, I like the Hunger Games too. I really need to maybe step up my reading and not just read things that middle schoolers are reading. So that's looking forward to the holidays. How about you? Anything fun for the next few weeks?
The family is coming up here. Always slightly painful, but we're gonna.
This is recording, by the way. Do they watch this show?
They don't watch. Right. But we're gonna try ham this year. Haven't done a ham before. I talked to. We have ham from our local farm.
Very nice.
Talked to the farmer at the farmer's market on Sunday. Asked him what I should do. He suggested a glaze with mustard and brown sugar.
That sounds good. Now, you're not going to know, the name that this pig once had, right?
I don't know. I could probably find out.
That's what I was going to say. Normally, it's a little more detached.
My daughter goes to a preschool on a different farm, or another farm where I get a farm share.
Oh, cool.
And the farmer there did a local column in the local paper last summer. And one of the columns he talks about how he has a couple kids and what it's like teaching his own children about the animals that they eat. And so they have a goat, on the farm. His name is Lightning.
Nice.
And he's trying to convey to his I think it's 5 or 6 year old. You understand that we're gonna eat Lightning, later on. And his child said, "Lightning's going to be delicious." So that's how it works when you're close to your food.
All right. Well, you know what? As long as Lightning had a good life and is being put to good use, it's not, is being used in full, even to the end.
That is the plan. Ted Nugent would approve of the way us Western Massachusetts liberals go about our local cuisine.
Very nice. Very nice.
In political news, in non-holiday news.
Yes, so you and I will have a Christmas holiday break. Possibly Congress will not.
Possibly. As we speak, things are a little fluid, so I don't know what the news will be by the time this airs.
Yes.
But we are. In fact, I actually didn't watch the final vote, but I assume the House did pass the Republican plan to not vote on the Senate payroll tax compromise and instead pass some declaration that we should have a conference committee. That did happen?
I think so. I haven't looked at Twitter in the last couple of hours. I know that there was supposed to be a vote last night, and then they bumped it to today because they wanted to vote in the light of day. But I'm actually not sure what the exact status is.
Actually, I'm looking at it right now. I got 2
Sorry,
computers
viewers.
today.
Done this before we started
229 to 193 to disapprove the Senate bill. And call for a conference committee. So that's things are a little bit up in the air now. I did see in new ABC Washington Post poll showing that more people trust President Obama than congressional Republicans on taxes, which is a 180-degree difference from where that poll number stood a couple months ago, and there was some consternation amongst Republicans, even some Republican conservative bloggers, that, oh my goodness, how is Obama taking the tax issue away from us? This is our precious issue. And in the light of this most recent development, the House Republicans rejecting what Senate Democrats and Republicans agreed on in large numbers, you're seeing some bloggers really taking it to the House Republicans, very much in sync with White House messaging and Democratic messaging. Not always the case in the liberal blogosphere, but Jed Lewison on Daily Kos had a headline this morning: House Republicans want to kill payroll tax cut, but are afraid to vote against it, noting that they had to pull a bill off the floor because it was too directly. It was a literal voting down of the Senate version, which they didn't want to have to do. They want to create some separate other procedural constructs, so they could say they weren't literally doing that. And a Huffington Post story had come out digging up the fact that 2 years ago there was a proposal from about 50 or so House Republicans to have a payroll tax holiday, to have a temporary payroll tax down to zero for a for a 2-month period of time, undercutting the argument they've been making lately, saying that 2 months is too short. It's all this economic uncertainty. It needs to be a year or more. Steve Bannon at the Washington Monthly picking up that story, saying the GOP used to want a 2-month payroll tax break. So what could explain the difference except for politics? It seems like Republicans, at least in the House, they're not unaware of this kind of line of thinking, but they seem to think that if they get back on, they have their messages at least coordinated right now that they want a year tax break for what's everyone so upset about. We want it to be longer. Forget about all the other things we want to add on to it. We want compromise. We want a conference committee. Who could be mad at that? They seem to think that's going to be able to override the reality of the Senate bipartisan bill it just passed. Are conservative bloggers in sync with what the House Republicans are trying to do, or are they still fretting that the tax issue is slipping away from them?
I think there's concern. You especially saw the CNN poll that now came out with Congress at 11% job approval. So I think folks are concerned that Congress is causing the tax issue to be lost. However, I haven't seen folks sort of indicting Speaker Boehner as the reason. In fact, it's actually, there's been Mitch McConnell has never been beloved by the conservative blogosphere, and this is sort of an instance where he's taking some incoming. You had Philip Klein at the Examiner Campaign 2012 blog, who he says he's writing about who's right and who's wrong in the payroll tax showdown, and he says, Did McConnell approve the deal without any input from House Speaker John Boehner on where House Republicans were? Or did Boehner reassure McConnell about the deal but misjudge how his own members would react? And then over at Red State, Eric Erickson has a whole post entitled The Strategic Incompetence of Mitch McConnell, basically making the point that it seems as though McConnell did this to try to improve congressional approval ratings, to try to make the case, hey, look, we're on the same page, we're going to pass this good thing, and Obama is on board, while misreading that the House Republicans, they believe that you need to do it for more than a year and that you need certain offsets, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems as though this was a leadership debacle, and bloggers are sort of siding with Boehner in this side by saying, how dare the Senate pass a piece of legislation that they don't actually think will get through the House and then check out and go on vacation.
But they're not blaming Boehner. There's some argument that Boehner did sign onto this deal and had to renege. They're taking Boehner's word that that's not the case.
Yeah, I have not seen a lot of folks blaming Boehner for this. It's a lot of what was McConnell and what was McConnell thinking and what is the Senate thinking. And I think a lot of the root of this too is, there's very different pace to the House and the Senate. The Senate is a slow moving train, and the House of Representatives is complete chaos. It's controlled chaos sometimes, but it's usually just really fast and fast and furious. And so I think, you are now seeing the enemy is not the Democrats, the enemy is the Senate. I think that McConnell, never beloved by the conservative blogosphere, is the one that is taking the brunt of this. And you have some other conservatives. You have Michael Walsh at the corner who says this is, he says this is just all political kabuki. He says Obama wants to paint congressional Republicans as tax-raising hypocrites, so naturally they're scattering in fear. But if they thought this thing through, rhetorical question about the Democrats, do they really want the paying suckers to finally realize that Social Security is a fraud? Making the argument that I brought up, I think, 2 weeks ago, which is, if we do this payroll tax holiday, doesn't this just make Social Security insolvency come quicker? Doesn't it make the argument in favor of entitlement reform more strong? And doesn't this continue to elevate those arguments? So you have some conservatives that are less concerned about is it 2 months versus a year, and are now focused on, eventually we are going to do some sort of payroll tax holiday. What does it look like, and does it strengthen other arguments politically, even if it causes only 11% to approve of Congress in the short term?
Now, the part of this that I have a hard time understanding what the Republican and conservative thinking has been is the Keystone Pipeline part of it, because initially the House was resisting doing any kind of payroll tax extension, and it seemed like Boehner was trying to get him on board and couldn't do it, and finally added in language to force the president to make a decision on Keystone before Election Day and not push it off to 2013 as he and the State Department previously said they were going to do. And the President and the State Department had said they did that not for political reasons. They said they were doing it because there was a different route proposed, and that required a whole new review process, assessing environmental impacts and whatnot. But the Republicans saying, let's force the president to have to make this decision. It obviously splits his coalition. The environmentalists are deeply opposed to it. Some of the unions really want it because they want the pipeline jobs. Let's force them to have to choose. And when Boehner proposed that, Obama's initial response was, "I'm going to veto this if the Keystone language is in there," and that seemed to get the House conservatives on board. And then when the Democrats accede to that demand in the Senate bill, all of a sudden, that's no longer the selling point. It seemed to only work to get conservatives in the House on board if it was going to mean a veto. Now it was going to be a bill. All of a sudden, it wasn't good enough anymore. Is there any commentary on the conservative side say, wait a second, we won what we wanted. We won the Keystone language. Why isn't this good enough?
I haven't seen a lot of folks saying, why isn't this good enough? I'm confused that it's not passing. I have seen some folks writing about trying to answer the question of why don't Republicans think this is good enough. So James Pethokoukis at the American, which is the AEI blog, has a post today where he's trying to respond to a blogger saying, Republicans are doing everything they can to block this extension, but why? I thought Republicans love tax cuts. And his response is, there might be some Republicans who are against the extension because they think it'll help the economy and that helps Obama, but he doubts that that's actually a big part of it, that he thinks that the big problem is that Republicans don't want to pay for temporary tax cuts by doing permanent tax hikes anywhere else, or by turning the GSEs into a new funding source for Uncle Sam. That there are components. I believe there's some component in the Senate bill that does something with fees on mortgages.
Right.
So I think what a lot of folks are saying is you're getting a 2-month change in the payroll tax, whereas you're taking on these permanent other things, or something that is less undoable, that is less than savory, and that's not a good approach for this. So I think, maybe it's just excuse making, but I think it is legitimate to say, if you're going to do a temporary thing, why are you doing a permanent thing to offset it? That doesn't make any sense. So that's one other blogger's take on why there is pushback still from the right.
One other blog I just want to mention on the Keystone issue is from David Roberts at Grist, who's also been on Blogging Heads before, and he was making an opposite point from what I was saying earlier. He was chastising his fellow environmentalists for not being happier with the Keystone language, because both in the initial Boehner proposal and what was in the Senate bill does not make Obama accept the pipeline, just makes him decide what to do on a faster time frame. And David Roberts' headline is "Greens poised to win on Keystone refuse to act like it." Because it was a veto threat, and then a veto that was backed off on, they treated it. Most environmentalists treated it like it was a bad thing, but the White House was continually saying in conversations with reporters, and I believe with other activists, saying, "Wait a second, the State Department has told us they can't recommend approving it unless they do a full review, so we will have no choice but to say we can't approve it." Now, maybe it's not politically fun for us because we are some parts of the coalition that want to see the pipeline jobs as few jobs as they may be. But the environmentalists shouldn't be upset about that because in all likelihood we're going to say no. And David Roberts in his argument saying, the environment should be doing victory laps around this, not sulking and kicking sand, acknowledging later on in his post that yes, they could cave in again. They could reverse course and accept the pipeline, but it's in the environmentalist interest to do the victory lap now anyway, so it's harder for them to do that. So it's widely understood that the expectation is that it would not go through and try to box them in, not create the conditions where it's even easier for them to change their mind. So there is some conflicting views within the environmental community and the broader liberal community on what kind of, is this a principled compromise or not?
We also have the issue of, even if at this point they go ahead and pass a fix, is it even implementable? That's one of the other things that has been floating around the conservative blogosphere, is that there was a report that came out that I think it's the Association of Payroll Processing Companies has said that, it's, especially with the year-end tax stuff going on, that it's actually very difficult to do these changes with just a temporary, it's logistically almost impossible to pull off what the Senate has asked for. So, I mean, there's back and forth over that, but that's a report that has gotten a lot of play. Is even if Harry Reid brings his merry band of senators back to town and they have some sort of vote, could you even implement at this, has Congress just pushed the ball? A, has Congress kicked the ball down the field too far? And B, is it even possible to get people on board with a 2-month extension, even if you pull all the Democratic, stuff out of it? Theoretically, could it even be implemented on just a 2-month basis?
Right, and I know there's been some pushback on that on the left. Yeah. How impossible is impossible? Are they overstating the case? But even putting that argument aside, I mean, the expectation in the initial compromise is not that it'd be 2 months and out. The point was it'd be 2 months to buy some time so they could then agree on a fuller extension. I mean, both Senate Republicans and Democrats are saying we do want to have it for the full year. And even House Republicans claim to believe that too. So if you're really serious about having a 1 year, and we all agree that no one's going to like every aspect of how you get there, what the compromise is going to be. But if you were serious about that common goal, you would suck up some kind of compromise. And I at least think it's much harder for House Republicans to argue that they really, 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 really want compromise when you have an 89-10 vote in the Senate on a compromise. It just makes that it's just an inherently weaker position to be in.
Well, and it's politically going to be really tough for the House because most voters are not, for the most part, reading deep down into the blogs like you and I are. They're just seeing that there was some sort of bipartisan vote in the Senate, which never happens these days, and yet the other chamber is fighting against it. So it's sort of working out, I think, unfortunately, as good as possible for Obama at this point.
Although, in fairness, we don't know how well the new Republican messaging will go over.
Right, and I think that House Republicans have a strong argument to make. The question is anybody even paying attention right now, or are they focused on traveling for the holidays? I mean, are voters outside of Iowa paying attention closely to political news right now? I don't know if that's the case.
Right. Well, outside of the Beltway, the big foreign policy news was the death of Kim Jong-il. And what does that mean for our relationship with North Korea, with China's relationship with North Korea, with the entire Asian, the whole region stability. I saw some posting on the left, but really just the foreign policy, left/center. You didn't see a flood of blogging about it from the left. I think just because it's just a little unclear what it does mean, and there wasn't a great compulsion to pontificate without knowing much detail. But Steve Clemens, who probably is one of your more prominent foreign policy bloggers, and he saw this as an opportunity to use what he called a neo-Nixonian approach to stir up robber baron envy, essentially to offer a lot of goodies to part of the North Korean military government apparatus, and not to the other half, to drive a wedge. So part of the governmental infrastructure would be enticed to be better integrated into the wider world. The other half would be saying, "What the hell's going on here?" and causing division that way. And even suggested that there are Chinese officials that have suggested to the U.S. that they do that. Beyond that, that kind of policy proposal, I think most of what I'm seeing is just sort of general uncertainty. Some reporting from The Atlantic, from Max Fisher, talking about how little we really know about the inner workings of the North Korean government and the degree of power that his youngest son, Kim Jong-un, is going to have. And I also took a little note from a foreign policy magazine, foreignpolicy.com post, noting that Wendy Sherman was a former Clinton aide who had done direct negotiations with North Korea. Her comments to NPR were not the standard crazy despot dies, but had more of a detached appraisal, saying, quote, "We shared similar impressions of meeting him. He was smart and a quick problem solver. He is also witty and humorous. Our overall impression was very different from the way he was known to the outside world." And I thought that was notable because I imagine, I mean, I'll hear from you what conservative bloggers were saying about this, but in general, a lot of conservative foreign policy analysis tends to want to create villains, and whatever kind of scuttlebutt is out there to make a dictator seem particularly strange will tend to be gobbled up, and it may be that those kind of depictions, not to say that Kim Jong-il is somehow a nice, interesting, wonderful guy you want to have a drink with, but it doesn't necessarily mean that every horrible story you hear about him is necessarily true. And it may be that there's a more complex picture out there that if you're actually going to be in the business of negotiating with these people, you need to know if you're actually going to have a productive conversation.
The consensus on the conservative side is no big fans of Wendy Sherman. Jennifer Rubin, she says, she starts off her post, "There is an irony that so shortly after the U.S. administration brought on one of the architects, Wendy Sherman, of a failed approach to North Korea, the clownish despot of that hellish regime should die. It seems that the Obama administration, ever in search of a deal and a stabilizing relationship with the totalitarian gulag, is oblivious to opportunities to destabilize the regime." And that's a little bit of what you saw over at the corner at National Review. You had Michael Oslin, he's a scholar at AEI, who writes a post where he says, "Sadly, there's little chance that Kim Jong-il's death means the dawn of a new spring in North Korea. Our wait-and-see attitude is justified only if we are prepared to strike back against unprovoked aggression and retain the moral compass to condemn the regime for the barbarity that it is." So not a lot of belief that there is ambiguity in Kim Jong-il's reign, and just a lot of concern that now that his son will be taking power, what does this mean? Are they going to try to do something aggressive, et cetera, et cetera? You have Charlie Strom at the corner, who he actually makes a link to Václav Havel, which I've seen a little bit of this. And Christopher Hitchens, I guess we'll talk about him next. But there was a tweet from that I saw and I don't remember who this was from, but it said, "I'd like to think that God let Havel and Hitchens pick the third." That, famous people sort of always kind of die in threes, and that Václav Havel was really the polar opposite in pretty much every way of Kim Jong-il, and that he, fought against oppression to bring about freedom in a country that was under Soviet rule. At any rate, Charlie Strom's post says that he thinks that creating a better outcome in the long term is going to require working harder in the short term, that sort of not doing anything and having a wait and see is potentially dangerous. The quote from this is that for North Korea, this means avoiding the easy temptation to bless the new rulers and seeking to support those dissidents to pursue the end of one of the world's most brutal governments. I mean, there's a belief that he says that we need to be supporting any dissidents that emerge. But what's really distressing is everything I've read, and not from conservative blogs necessarily, but just in general, is that there actually isn't disdain to stoke in North Korea, because it's such a bizarre place with this complete information blackout. So it's not as though there is secret chatter in back rooms about how do we find freedom, that it's really just this, which is almost it's a really terrifying thought that there's just isn't a lot of a dissident movement there. So I wonder if, this sort of conservative push for we need to find these dissidents and help them throw off the shackles of communist dictatorship, do these dissidents exist? Is this, strategy that these conservative bloggers are pushing for, is it feasible?
Well, and the practicality is always a tough part of these kinds of things, right? And it raises the question: how productive is foreign policy blogging? Because you can only be so innovative from your laptop. I mean, there seems to be sort of a general playbook, I feel, that the neoconservative world has, which is find the dissidents and defectors, prop them up outside of the country. Give them some kind of global platform, and then when the instability arises, whether provoked from the inside or the outside, then fly them in. And that model didn't work all that great in Iraq, and I would argue that the model that's what we've seen in Egypt and Libya, things a little bit more bottom up, but now but the exact paths they took, that Obama took with Egypt and Libya, were different because the circumstances were not identical. One required a military intervention and one did not. So it wasn't just using a cookie cutter playbook. So now you have North Korea, where you might not have any kind of dissident movement to start with at all. If that's the case, and maybe it's not, maybe there's more out there than we realize. But if that's the case, it does beg the question. As distasteful as it might be, perhaps you do have to do some face-to-face negotiation and work with what you have. Now, to go back to what Stephen Clemens was saying was, I think it was Steve Clemens' point, and not someone else's. Forgive me if I'm mixing and matching. But that the idea would be not to cause a utter collapse, which is usually what you see wished for in neoconservative circles, but to create a smoother transition. In fact, I think Steve Clemens called it China-like, where you still don't love the government. It's not to say a democratic government, but it's at least integrated into the world to the point where you can do business with them and prevent them from being a destabilizing influence where they're shipping nukes all over the place. And that may mean that down the line, there's hope for a broader democracy, but you deal with the situation you have in front of you. What can you do to make this a more stable place? Maybe if you can get part of that regime to change their behavior, that's your baby step that you have to take right now if you don't have any kind of dissident movement to work with.
I think that the rather than looking to make North Korea make baby steps with kind of current leaders in power or make the best of a bad situation, I think part of the reason why conservative bloggers are not necessarily taking the as optimistic an approach is, that it doesn't, there's no sign that Kim Jong-il's son is going to be any easier to reason with, and in fact there's concern that because he lacks some of those quirky traits, because he lacks the bizarre and quirky traits of that Kim Jong-il clearly had, does that actually make him more problematic because he's got, there's less, kind of goofiness there? And, does it make it better or worse? Nobody has any idea. The Charlie's Wrong piece suggests that one of the best things that could be done, and I don't know how the South Koreans would feel about this, but is that that you have South Korea that is, that could be a huge help in any attempt to encourage democracy or to help ease a North Korean transition from the status quo into something that is more humane for the people and is more embracing of freedom. So that's one of the ideas that has emerged is, that perhaps we need to leverage South Korea as best as we can in this turbulent time.
Now, the death that perhaps got more blog attention than Kim Jong-il, I think, was Christopher Hitchens.
Yes.
I would imagine that the tributes on the right, even though Hitchens was sort of historically seen as being on the left, I imagine what you read on the right was more laudatory than the stuff that was written on the left.
By and large, yes. There was, Andrew Sullivan was a close friend of his. Had a sort of nice little post he did on Friday, called Hitchens Invites Me to Brunch. It's short little, and most of the pieces that you're reading on the right are, they're less about, how he was, his positions on things like fighting radical Islam, and it's much more about him as a person, him doing kind things. You have Michelle Malkin, who writes a piece, where she talks about how she agreed or disagree with him, and we certainly did, jovially so, on some of his extreme atheist stunts. Hitchens was a trenchant analyst and a naturalized American original. Seeing him as someone who is both very kind personally and someone who, stood up for things that they believed in there at the end. But she has a neat anecdote where she mentions asking him to sign a copy of God Is Not Great that she could give to Allah Pundit, who blogs over at Hot Air, who is atheist. And he, kindly obliged, sent back the book. She posted a picture of it. So a lot of the tributes were things like that. You had Christopher Buckley, who was kind of excommunicated from the conservative movement back during the 2008 election, but he wrote a post all about, his relationship with Christopher Hitchens and how he, viewed him as the sort of person whose life he greatly envied. I think the big topic now that I'm seeing bloggers write about is Bill Bennett came out and said, I hope Christopher Hitchens is getting a big surprise today. Sort of meaning that he hopes Hitchens is surprised that he's discovered that there is an afterlife and there is a God. But this sort of it leads to the question of what kind of surprise is Christopher Hitchens getting, and what does that mean again? Intended as a positive thing, one assumes, but so there's actually been a lot of discussion in the blogosphere about this has actually led to a big discussion of Christian theology. And if you are an atheist, does that absolutely mean that when you die you are condemned to hell, or does it mean that if Christians are right, then does that mean that there's a chance, that he would be in heaven? Is it faith? Is it works? People are saying he was a good person personally. Does that matter? So really fascinating sort of back and forths about Christian theology that have emerged as a result of Christopher Hitchens passing away. And I think that one of the posts that I've enjoyed reading the most was Ross Douthat. He did a post over at his blog at the New York Times, where he sort of dives into all of the different strains of Christian theology to make the case that it is. He says, I'll just read you a direct quote. "The point here is not that Christopher Hitchens was some sort of secular saint who spent his life clothing the naked, administering to the sick. His impressive thirst for justice notwithstanding, the level of wall-to-wall hagiography that greeted his passing was more than a bit over the top. But the point is that we just don't know. Never say you know the last word about any human heart," as Henry James said it. Or in the words of St. Paul, "For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face." That, you can never know, but, he suggests that the plain words of the New Testament suggest that Christopher Hitchens' ultimate fate will count among the least of the next life's many surprises. So I think that's perhaps been my sort of favorite topic that the blogosphere has gone into. And these nice tributes to this man that obviously so many people cared so deeply about, and the questions it raises about, who we are and why we are here and what happens to us after we go.
My favorite scene from South Park was when you see the orientation in hell. And everyone there was wondering why they're there, because they were all followers of some religion, and the person who was doing the orientation said, "I'm sorry, the correct answer was Mormon."
Oh, South Park. They love the Mormons.
But it's the commentary on the left about Hitchens. I'd say respectful, but more negative. And if folks don't necessarily know why that might be, considering one of his last acts was, going after religion, and as we all know, liberals are all guy-hating atheists. Hitchens, the blogosphere history almost sort of begins in the Clinton's second term, which was a little pre-blog, but some of your early bloggers were still doing their initial forays in online politicking, through things like Media Whores Online at the time. And Hitchens, that was sort of one of his first ideological pivots when he was a fixture on Hardball, just tearing Clinton apart over the Monica Lewinsky affair. So he was seen by, online liberals as, part of the Washington village that was determined to destroy Clinton no matter what, and that shaped a lot of attitudes about how the media political industry works, and that was only amplified when he became a steadfast enthusiast of the Iraq War during the Bush years, so Digby had a piece about Hitchens a few days ago, where Hitchens was sort of praising Ahmed Chalabi, and she writes, the 25-year exile Chalabi greatly impressed Hitchens by bravely saying he thought the world's only imperial power could overthrow a third world dictator. Plus, he knew famous Iraqi people and dropped lots of political and literary references into the conversation. Imagine that, all those things in one meeting with the Orwell-worshipping, name-dropping literary and political snob Christopher Hitchens. If I were the cynical type, I might just think the world-weary grim crusader Hitch got himself well and truly conned. And then ends by saying, judging by the outpouring of grief I've been reading, he'll be greatly missed by his friends and family. That's certainly a tribute to the affection he inspired among many of the people who knew him. Many also celebrate his writing talent, which was impressive. He was nothing if not prolific, but he was an intellectual bully, and I think our public life could do with a little bit less of that. So there was that sense that Hitchens was not necessarily as good a writer he wasn't necessarily doing a real fair give and take on the issues, lest he had far more of an absolutist approach to these kind of debates. And she was being critical of that. You also have a separate issue, going back to one of his Vanity Fair articles, which said that women were genetically not funny. And both Katha Pollitt and the blogger Etchedine of the Snakes both reminisced about that. Etchedine said essentially, I cannot get over the fact that he was not writing to me. I cannot get to the point where I can feel comfortable and relaxed reading about his other points, agree with them or disagree with them, because I learned that I was a baby factory. You have someone who could never be funny, someone whose job it was to fillet brave and eloquent men whose whole existence was defined as the sincerely sexual and reproductive role he had decreed for women. So there is some tough talk about Hitchens, on certain corners left, because he was sort of a main foil in the early liberal blogging days.
Yeah, I when I woke up and read the news, one of the first tweets that I read was somebody saying that there wasn't anything up on the Nation homepage, and did that mean that he was officially? Is that what it means to be persona non grata? That
and he wrote there for a long time.
Yeah, and so that was I not be as someone who doesn't read the lefty blogosphere as much as you do. I was wondering to what extent there
Well, what Katha Pollitt did write something about him at the Nation eventually, but again, it was not necessarily just a glowing portrayal, because she had some major issues with him.
But yeah, it is a bit of like cognitive dissonance if you think about it. This is somebody who, he wrote frequently for Vanity Fair and was friends with a close friend of Andrew Sullivan's and stuff, and we don't think of that as normally the sort of qualifiers that make the conservative blogosphere rally around you, and yet there was clearly just a real outpouring of sadness over his passing, and of admiration for his contributions in life, even when these bloggers said even when we disagreed with him, we always thought that he was on the mark. So maybe it's easier to say that when he ends up being more on your side, but so with all of that, I suppose I guess I have an announcement for the viewers. I'm taking a brief break from the Weekend blog.
Very sad.
Some of you may have seen the news that my boss, David Winston, I've mentioned this on the show a few times, that he's informally advising Newt, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it's no longer informal. It is formal. It is official. He's been hired to work on the campaign, and as a result, when it comes to 2012 discussion, while my opinions are my own, I can't come on this show and read you a laundry list of here are all the horrible things that bloggers have said about candidate X or candidate Y this week, either because it won't be viewed as credible or because I'll be beating up on someone who is a client of my boss and he sends my paycheck.
And you can't just sit there while I do that browbeat.
Yeah, sometimes I sit here and I give you weird looks and I go like, really? But I can't just do that on 2012 stuff. So at least so long as Newt is still in this race and this is going forward, I will not be able to talk about 2012. So I'm going to be taking a little break from the Weekend blog because 2012 is the big topic in the conservative blogosphere. You can't escape it. So that's my news. I'm going to miss you all. I was very touched last week reading through the comments. People were concerned that I'd cut my hair. I'm like, oh, the commenters are kind of like my mom. Like, what kind of haircut did you just get? So I will.
And now we won't know what's going on with your hair for weeks and weeks.
I know. I'm gonna have to do something crazy for when I come back, like mohawk, wear some kind of wig for half the show. It'll be great.
Well, but it's very exciting. I am excited for you to be in the crucible of a very exciting presidential campaign.
It will be an adventure.
And I'd mention that might go on for a long period of time. It might not be a sprint. It might be a marathon. So for my sake, I hope it's wrapped up soon so you can come back. But I'm fully prepared for the possibility that you'll be in that other universe all the way through, maybe even through the convention. Who knows?
We'll see.
Have a great holiday, have a great Christmas, wonderful New Year.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to you too.
Will you be tromping around Iowa anytime soon?
No, I will not be in Iowa. I'm not working for the campaign itself, but I will not be in Iowa. I will not be knocking on doors or doing anything of that nature. Unfortunately, I won't be there to observe it because I feel like it would be so neat just to go see. You can't
hitch a ride to see what's going on.
So the plan currently is not for me to be in Iowa, but if that changes, I'll send you guys dispatches from the field.
Okay, excellent. Well, great. I don't know if we'll be back next week in the holiday week, but I'm sure we'll be back soon enough. Until then, this is the Weekend blog. Take care.